right, I just can't help myself here. We've got Senator Mike Braun from the great state of Indiana, who is an old friend. Biden said today, so we got a good jobs number. Biden says today, when asked about inflation, that he inherited inflation from Donald Trump. Now, statistically, the inflation rate in late 2020 and early 21 was about 1.5%. And Biden ran it up to almost 10%. How can he just get away with that?
Because I call them political enterprisers on the other side of the aisle. I come from the real world of being an entrepreneur. When you know all that stuff, you can cut through it. When you get out to D.C., I've been there for 4 years. If you think you're good at Madison Avenue, you'll try to spin anything. We all know pre-COVID, we had the best economy that I've ever been a part of, and I started my business back in the early 80s when we had real inflation. My mortgage was at 10%, waited 3 or 4 years. In the early 80s, it would have been at 18%. That's hogwash. We need to point it out. There's been more fiscal enterprising. I dusted off my economics degree, and I know what Keynesian economics is about. He'd be spinning in his grave now, knowing what the Democrats have done. They've enterprised, just like Rahm Emanuel said, don't let a crisis go to waste. And ever since the crisis occurred, they've tried to flip this economy into one that was working on all cylinders with no inflation, wages going up in the toughest places. And I almost had the CBO to admit that the tax cuts were paying for themselves because you had close to a 3% economic growth rate. All of this other stuff is nonsense because it was done with the Fed helping on the most aggressive fiscal policy we've had since the Great Depression.
But the Trump tax cuts, in effect, did pay for themselves.
They did.
Laffer has been on the show many times. 2 years later, they were about $250 billion ahead. The CBO should score that. Senator, let me just ask you, though. Today was a good jobs number. Those are the facts, okay, over 500,000 jobs. I'm going to reckon, and ask your opinion, Mr. Biden's going to make a lot of hay out of this number and roll into the State of the Union on Tuesday selling the Biden economy, how good it was, how great it was, et cetera, et cetera. How's that going to play?
You got to be fast enough on your feet for that one. We've replaced the productive side of our GDP partially with more from government. And when you look at the jobs, I still stay in touch with what businesses are actually doing. There was such an incentive to stay home and watch Netflix for nearly a year or more. Many companies are erring on the side of getting some people back because it was so hard to get them to work. And then let's not forget about the labor participation rate. That's way low compared to what it was during the Trump administration.
Pre-pandemic, right. They're not nowhere near as high.
Yes, and I think labor calculates too. If the government's going to be there, what's the rush of getting back into the productive economy? I think there's all three of them that you'd have to hit them with, or otherwise they're going to try to grow government just like they have over the last 2 years at the expense of the private side.
He's going to say that this brand, it isn't Keynesian, as you said. Keynes would roll over in his grave.
He would.
It's woke, big government socialism. He's going to say that it worked. He's going to say it brought down the inflation rate and increased jobs. I mean, I can tell you that I'm going to be down in Washington. We're going to broadcast it down there. I'm going to work that night. I'm going to love the State of the Union address. But that's what he's going to sell.
And it's going to be up to us on the other side of the aisle. To me, a lot of what has occurred in terms of how we've grown government to now way larger as a percentage of the GDP than it's ever been, other than in World War II. And they want to keep it there. And the crowding out effect that interest is going to have on the budget itself is going to be really, when you just do the math, take 4% of interest rate increases. Once that gets priced into the relatively short-term debt that our government currently has, you know, we just spent $1.7 trillion on that omnibus bill split between defense and domestic. $550 billion is about what we pay in interest currently. Do 1% of 30 trillion, that's 300 billion. Take 4%, you know, somewhere down the road, we're going to soon be paying as much for interest as we are in either defense or domestic. And if you keep going at the pace we are, we'll be paying as much for interest as both of them put together.
And we can't even shoot down a Chinese balloon.
And that,
Which really infuriates me, and I think it's going to infuriate a lot of people. Last one, Senator Braun. ESG, can we rid ourselves of ESG as an investment, retirement? It's not exactly a mandate, but it's the Quran thing.
Right.
I noticed you've banded together with Joe Manchin and some others to try to stop that. Can you give us a quick review of where that is?
Congressional Review Act, that's the only way you can challenge an unruly executive branch, either through the agencies or rulings. That ruling went into effect this past week. If I get one more Democrat, that passes the Senate.
Yes. I didn't know that.
Yes, I got Joe Manchin, every Republican. So I get one more Democrat, and we're going to work on that. It passes the Senate. It's going to pass in the House, and then Joe Biden would have the embarrassment of either vetoing it or signing it. And what that does, it just simply says, you should not be encouraging retirement fund managers to be investing in environment, social, and governance when it's shown that that'll give you about a return 2.5% less than what it would be otherwise.
And the ERISA laws stipulated the only thing that matters for these
financial return.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's it.
So
That's
I'm going to
all
harp
it's
on that. We're going to take it to this level. When I did it on the vaccine mandate, the Supreme Court came in and got rid of that nonsense. We did it successfully here a few months ago.
Senator Mike Braun of Indiana. Thank you, sir. We appreciate
My pleasure.
it. Good to see you on Saturday.